the new generations, the millennials and Gen Z, etc., seem to be driving you at that customer interface to make changes and to be very agile, actually. And I think that was for both of your organizations, is that right?
Yeah, certainly, we can see this wave of young people coming through, whether it's millennial or Generation Z. They are thinking very, very differently. They are much more independent, they're much more likely to start their own business. They care a lot less about some of we were discussing a little bit before the meeting started about some of the security aspects that we would have expected some older people to consider. I think there's a real difference that they see between risk and security, and they see risk as an opportunity. It's there's no innovation without risk, and they're very much up for. They grew up with a mobile phone in their hand, a lot of them. It's not new, this is the norm for them. And so having information there available, communicating, their colleagues, their friends, this is the way that they work. And we have to adapt with that young generation. And when we were talking earlier about security, for us, it's more about protection. It's much more about, yes, we have to protect the data, but we also have to protect not only our staff, but our young people within that. So, we're working a lot with artificial intelligence, for example, because we're looking at how do we protect the conversations between young people and our organisation or volunteers. So we're looking at how do we spot trends, how do we spot when a young person is going down a direction which may be for radicalisation, or it may be about self-abuse or suicide. So this is where technology is incredibly exciting.
It's quite scary stuff, actually.
Yeah, but this is where technology is booming, and it can actually add some real value.
I think that's a really interesting point, and as you mentioned, we talked about this earlier. And I think from my point of view, we are historically, we the security profession are historically very bad at explaining risk, what the most likely risks are, should we say, to anyone using electronic information and IT systems. And that's partly because we're still trying to understand ourselves what we do. It's still a new field, IT generally, and the securing of IT is still relatively new, so we don't have that much historic data upon which to base our judgments about risk. But I would, having heard what you just said, I would take that even further. As we move forwards with these younger people, and you're right, we have a duty to protect them, we're actually even poorer when new threats come along, and I believe there are new threats that come along with digitalization. We're actually very poor at bringing those to the attention of those younger people. Whether we see those new threats by doing what you were suggesting, monitoring carefully the uses of data, or using artificial intelligence to analyze that data and pick out new threats, whether it's that or just something that comes suddenly as a result of increased terrorism, we're not good at bringing those to the attention of the young people so that they can make decisions. We're still perhaps in the old mindset in security, where we're saying, I know what security is, I'll make the decisions, I'll allow you to do that, I'll stop you to do that, which is completely contrary, of course, to the whole philosophy around digitalization, if there is a philosophy around it.
As David said earlier on, he talked about a feature of security along with the kind of usual three things that we all talk about to be sort of agility or convenience, and that's fundamentally what we're talking about, I think, is a shift in priorities between that payoff, and is a payoff, between how secure something you want something versus how quickly do you want to be able to change it, or how convenient do you want it to be. And so I'd agree with that, but I think that's the balance that might be changing in the younger generation, perhaps, although they're no fools. And I think tales from retailers typically or banks about how their life's going to be better because I can better target something to you and you'll like me for it. I think it only takes you to be hit. So we had a conversation, didn't we, about whether their attitudes will change as they get older. And I think that'll depend on their experience. I think if they do experience convenience, that is a good payoff for accepting a higher information risk, then good to go.
I think you're starting to finally see a backlash where people are demanding privacy, and you're starting to see certain organizations use that as a competitive advantage. So you look at certain chat protocols, you look at Apple, for example, providing some level of mechanism to say, we can protect your chat messages, for example, right, your text messages. So I think that's going to continue to change. But right now, largely, there's a few companies that control most of the data that we use every day. And I just don't have another choice to change to something else. So I think you're going to see a balance out in the future as more and more companies pick up on the fact that we don't want to be tracked continuously and all the time, right?
So, is this the time to bring in GDPR? Is it a game changer?
No.
I don't think so.
It's raising the bar to some extent. So if I look at it from the point of view of a security professional, it makes no difference at all to the fundamental duty that I have, my business has, to protect the customer data that we acquire against insecurity. Makes no difference at all to that. It doesn't change the way I do security at all. It does raise the bar in terms of disclosure if there is a security incident, the 72-hour. Of course, we're still waiting for more guidance as to when the clock starts ticking on that 72 hours. And of course, it raises the potential penalty level if we mess up. Actually, from a security professional point of view, to me, they are very positive changes. I think the biggest change of GDPR is all to do with right to be forgotten, informed consent, and I think many of those issues are very, very difficult for the IT leader who has a legacy platform and a legacy base of data. And I see, both in the organizations I've worked in and others, talking to others, I see that's where a lot of the sort of scratching of heads is going on as to how do I retrofit some of that into my customer-facing systems and into my customer databases.
Yeah, I'm with you, John. It's not radically changing how do we manage security, but it's definitely a step to the right direction, returning rights to customers, returning the opportunity to decide how are we allowed to use their data, their information. So in this era where information is the new oil or the new gold, we cannot just steal our customer information for no reason. We have to explain why do we need data from our customers. So I think definitely this is a step in the right direction. It will imply some changes because in order to be compliant and in order to deliver this compliance in a convenient way to your customers, you have to be in control of your data.
As John was saying about the right to be forgotten, I mean, for us, a lot of our historical information is in paper records, and for that is probably our biggest challenge with GDPR. And I think what that's forcing for us is more of a policy change. So we either try and fix our historical paper records, or we make a decision to just lose them. And I think that's where it's pushing us to. It's making big policy decisions rather than technical decisions.
But I think that's it, isn't it? It's a major opportunity, actually, because the number of organizations I go into where they really have got data governance under their thumb is very limited. And it does give people who have the responsibility of looking after data, I think it gives them a tool, actually, and a rationale to be able to improve things, as you were saying. So it is a bit of an opportunity. But Tony, I'm sure you've got
it's a huge opportunity for my organization for a number of reasons. The most basic reason being that a lot of our competitors are cloud only, and having a solution in the cloud with GDPR and collecting personal information is a very complex challenge, potentially. You have to host data maybe in different regions. You may have to anonymize that data. There's very much some uncertainty. My concern is that the scope is relatively broad, and most people don't understand what may be covered by PII. The definition between Europe and the US is slightly different. It could mean everything from a public IP address, which now includes all our log files, to just really what I consider personal information, like the combination of name and email and things like that.
So you've got 2 regulations coming up this year, haven't you?
Yeah.
to European the
In addition
directive.
to everything else.
Yeah.
Well, having 2 regulations a year will be really a dream.
I'm thinking of
That's not the case. Now we have lots of regulations coming every year.
but there's 2 big ones, aren't there? The
Well,
GDPR and the
and we have the Payments Directive. We have lots of new regulations coming along. But coming back to not just the regulation, but the security and data, I really see a strong connection between convenient security and information. So yeah, traditional security and even physical security and firewalls and all this kind of stuff it's still relevant for sizable organizations. But when we talk about security to protect our relationship with our customers, that's a completely different story. I mean, traditional security, passwords and stuff like that, it's just not perceived by customers as convenient. So I see kind of an evolution in that space, and this evolution will be driven by information. And I'm banking obviously with TSB, but with some other banks, and oftentimes I used to transfer some money back to Barcelona. So it's the way this is managed by some banks, despite the fact that I'm doing so twice a quarter to the exact same destination account and for similar amounts of money, it's like, well, something's happening. So they suddenly call me in my phone. They say, well, we identified a potential threat because some money is trying to get out of your account. And I say, yeah, usually I do that. So, embedding information to be more aware of how your customers are behaving, and so anticipating what could be identified as a potential threat or not, is definitely a game changer.
I think, and you both make a really tremendous point from my point of view about the future of security, in a digitalized world or any other world. Our future in security is about understanding the data better. And that's based on the premise that there are so many threats, and the use of electronic information, IT, is so pervasive that we're not going to stop all the bad things happening. So what we've got to do is see the bad things as they're happening and react really, really well. And that goes both to your point about GDPR. The worst thing that could happen, the threat that comes out of GDPR from a security point of view, is it starts interfering with our ability to log sufficient data so that we can see the bad things happening. And it goes to your point exactly, which is understanding the data better is not just a route to improvement in customer experience, it's a route to better security, it's a route to giving the customers more usable security mechanisms as well.
I think one of the things that really resonates with me is that your mobile phone is really the prediction of the future of security in so many ways. We started out on mainframes a little bit before my time, but sort of these shared work environments where you had limited actions you could take, and then we sort of distributed this where you each had your own PC and could do tons of things on it, and we're slowly going back to a device that's more limited with your phone that has a sort of defined user experience. It has a security by design built into it, right? And it's probably the most secure device that I own. And you're starting to see a transition towards operating systems becoming secure by design. Look at Windows 10, for example. It's amazing how Windows has improved over the last several years. It's incredible. And I think you're going to see things like antivirus and other software that was used more of as a patch to fix things that were broken in the underlying operating systems disappear as these major vendors like Apple and Microsoft and Google start to solve these challenges. You can see it already.
One thing about GDPR, we're here talking as large, mostly well-run organizations. The one thing that has struck me about GDPR is the sudden panic that I see in a lot of organizations. The small, medium to small organizations. And the realization that actually they can't avoid this. And if their data governance and their data, the DPA activity they have is not up to scratch, then they have a major issue. And I think, and it's the fact that the message hasn't actually got out to business yet in these organizations. I'm sure in your organizations that's not the case, but certainly across the piece, and certainly in the UK, but not only in the UK, I've seen it in France and Germany as well. There's this realization that actually you're not going to be able to avoid this, and Brexit is not a get out of jail card.
As part of our place-based activities, we do a lot of work with small to medium-sized enterprises in our region.
Yes.
And I would absolutely echo that. I mean, there is sheer abject terror with some people who've just never even really considered it before. And, you know, our general advice is, again, distinguish between the stuff that you really need to hold and keep that has some value from an information point of view versus exhaust data that you happen to collect, and be very careful. One other thing we've noticed is they try to deploy, again, conceptually sensible sounding strategy like collect and keep data, you know, because consultants are telling them somewhere that, you know, your data's the new oil and all this kind of thing. So you might not know what to do with it yet, but just keep. And we're kind of actively now, from that lens, saying that's probably not the brightest thing. If, you know, at your stage, and also making use of the tooling that's out there. Frankly, there's all too many smaller organisations that are still cranked up some sort of, you know, access relational database that acts as their CRM system. It probably ends up costing them more than it would do anyway to go and get a small licensing regime with one of the major cloud vendors, but they haven't broken through into that level of technology yet. We, for example, do our very best not to store data about a citizen because we don't need to. We might sometimes need to uniquely identify somebody so that we can go back to them, but we obfuscate that very, very early in the process because you don't actually need to know that it's sort of Simon from Swindon. You just need to know that there's a contact that you might need to get back to, and there's obviously approaches that you can use to address those. But I do agree with David's point. The biggest thing for me that comes out of GDPR is disclosure, because I think going back to my premise earlier, that this ultimately is people trying to make a risk-based decision based on convenience and agility and getting the kind of customer experience they want versus their perception of the associated risk, because in my view it very much is a balance. You know, we all know the safest computer is one that's never turned on, never plugged into anything, and sits in a corner somewhere, and that's absolutely true. It's quite a secure piece of kit, but I think at the moment they haven't got a proportionate view of the real risk that they're taking, and I think the disclosure and the forcing of, so that even if there's just statistics, say, do you realise there's been this many identity frauds or whatever it might be this year, I think will really help normal people make better and more informed decisions about this kind of risk versus convenience balance.
And I think the fines too provide sort of a very real number that they can predict what might happen to their stock price. So we can actually get a real value in terms of what that risk represents.
Yes, I mean, if you're an organization with a 2% profit margin, 4% fine. It's quite meaningful.
It isn't going to be great. Based on turnover, yeah, quite.
If that's ever applied, and that's the big if, I think when the first time we see this applied, that's really going to shift people's thinking.
It's all about that. I mean, going back to your use case of a lot of paper documentation, and I know we've done the same analysis and come to the same place. There is some concern about stuff we've got locked up that could be construed to be GDPR from that perspective. Our view is we hope very much that there'll be a sensible and holistic application of policy, in so much to say that actually this stuff is quite secure. It's locked in a vault. You know, you have to physically break in to get your hands on it, and we can't apply some of the kind of proposed systematic protection for it. We're hoping very much that the implementation, which is, you know, everything's in the detail of implementation, will be such that, you know, I'm sure there'll be some early fines, big fines early on. I'm sure there will, but hopefully that, you know, this is all being done for the right reasons. I think. I think this is ultimately being done for the right reasons.
And that vagueness, I think, is why you see panic, right? Yeah. That's the other thing.
But I think, and dead right, there's a lot of still uncertainty, particularly in the SME end of the market, as you pointed out, Bill. But for me, the saving grace there is that we do have a regulator who's very focused on this. I think the UK regulator has a pretty good track record of being sensible, reasonable, and giving advice and trying to reach out. The thing that's held back the UK regulator is funding. One of the other positives of GDPR is that there's a potential for the regulator to have actually significantly better funding, if only through the fines.
Where did speed cameras get the police?
I wasn't going to mention that one, John.
But I think there's a great opportunity. I mean, I'm hoping it won't be a cliff edge next year.
I think it's a great opportunity for the regulator to pick up speed and offer better guidance, particularly to the smaller end of the business world, and indeed to offer interpretation guidance and be very sensible in the way they actually take action in the case of a breach.
That guidance, I mean, what we do is we help businesses start up. So what we need to do is to get them set up right in the first place. And to be honest, that's easier because when you're setting them up, you set them up as this is the way you do it. And so that bit's the easy bit, but we still need to know clarity on what the right advice is. And it is a bit grey, if I'm honest, still.
It is right now, absolutely.
Yeah. But it's only, May's not that far away, You think there'd be a little bit more
But I
clarity.
think I'm more comfortable with that actually in a mature regulator and a mature policy environment, which I do believe the UK in all areas actually of information management and security is genuinely a leading light. I'm absolutely convinced these people are doing it for the right reasons. So that is a bit of a leap of faith. And to be honest, I'd rather that, going back to all of our definitions of agile, I would rather that than with the best respect somebody's locked up in some room somewhere defining a set of prescriptive rules. Because that's just not the way we all know. Certainly you guys as security professionals know that just isn't the real world. Going back to potential penalties, people will definitely have breaches having done all the right things. And one would hope that the regulator and the ICO and those kinds of people would take much more account of the fact that, to some extent, for a targeted, motivated opponent, as we all know, they will get there. Given enough resources, given enough time and given enough skill, they will get there no matter what you do. And so therefore you'd like to think that's the kind of environment, the punitive environment that we put into place would be taking as much account of, well, you're trying to do the right things, have you done the basics properly, much more so than, well, you've had a breach, it was this data, it has this impact, so we're going to stuff you with this kind of fine.